Everybody has been enjoying the conference? Yes? Good. We have had a great time exploring and discussing the issues and challenges that our industry faces in Colorado and beyond, and I'm excited for our next lunch. Last year, candidate for governor Jared Polis came to our conference, and he talked about his vision for Colorado. And at that time, I said if he was elected governor, that we would not always agree with him. We would not always see eye to eye with him. But when we disagreed, we would do it respectfully. And I appreciate the governor for accepting our invitation to have this conversation today. We invited him because as governor of Colorado, his perspective drives policy in our state. And if we don't sit down as an industry, if we don't sit down and talk with each other, I don't believe we can ever fully expect to understand each other. We talk a lot in Colorado about the Colorado way. And to me, that's about bringing a diverse group of voices and interests together to move our state forward. So this moment in time that we sit in here in 2019, looking ahead into 2020, this moment of time requires leadership. And if we want to preserve the Colorado way, then I think it's incumbent upon us, our industry, to reach out and create space for a civil dialogue with those that we don't always agree, so we can look for a path forward. So with that said, let me introduce our guest for lunch today. Governor Jared Polis was born and raised in Colorado. He's an entrepreneur, education leader, and public servant. After launching his first business from his college dorm room, Polis then founded several innovative online businesses, including one of the world's leading online flower retailers, ProFlowers. He then committed himself to making sure other Coloradans had the opportunity to pursue their dreams. Polis founded public schools for at-risk youth and new immigrants, Patriot Boot Camp, a nonprofit that gave help to returning veterans to start their own business. And he co-founded the startup incubator Techstars, which now operates in over 30 cities worldwide. Prior to serving as governor, Polis served on the State Board of Education and represented Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, where he was rated the most effective member of the Colorado delegation. As governor, Polis enacted a tax cut for 144,000 small businesses in Colorado and is focused on saving Coloradans money and continuing our state's strong economic growth. Please welcome Governor Jared Polis.
Good to see you.
Thanks so much for coming.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure.
Thanks for sitting down. As I noted, you were here with us last year at this time, and quite a few things happened in the meantime. You were elected governor. You've been in office for 8 months now, maybe seems a little longer than that. Tell us a little bit about what it's been like so far for being governor. What have you learned about Coloradans that you maybe didn't know, or what has surprised you?
Well, you know, we live in an amazing state, and being governor, there's just been so many highs and lows, right? I mean, we all mourned together at the STEM shooting. I visited kids in the hospital, attended Kendra Casillas Memorial Service. We were also able to enact, landmark legislation, and I was just at a kindergarten in Jefferson County today, seeing that every kid in our state can go to full-day kindergarten. So there's highs and lows, but one thing that is a common thread is just how wonderful this state is. The quality of life, an economy that's the envy of the nation, and really problem solvers on the ground in every community that are working at the local level and the state level to make Colorado even more amazing.
Good. Well, thanks. Let's talk a little bit about oil and gas. That's why we invited you here. Let's go back to the beginning.
I thought we were talking Broncos.
I'd be happy to talk Broncos,
okay.
too. We're not going to talk Rockies.
Wait, nobody told me we were talking about oil and gas. You're just pulling.
We can agree not to talk about the Rockies, maybe Broncos.
Next year, Rockies.
Potentially oil and gas. All right, sounds good. Take us back to the legislative session and Senate Bill 181. I know we have separate branches of government, and the legislature writes the laws and approves them, and then you sign them, veto them, or let them become law without your signature. But the governor can set the tone, can set an agenda, can set, especially for his party, and your party controls all the levers of government, state government. So talk to us about Senate Bill 181. It's a bill that's of huge concern to our industry. What was your role in it? What did you think of it as it was initially introduced and then as amended?
So, our role is we're the executive part of government that ultimately has to implement and execute what the law says. So we were very interested in making sure it was a workable framework. I want to thank Jeff Robbins, now the COGCC director, really, and others for providing really important technical input to the legislature. Because legislators, Democratic or Republican, generally in their professional experience haven't run state agencies with that kind of authority. So that kind of authority to make sure that whatever laws that they pass can meet the real world in a way that makes sense is very important, and we provided that kind of framework. Obviously, the framework around 181, reducing the risks like, Amendment 74, Proposition 112, that are these huge, would have a huge impact, negative impact on our economy, and trying to empower, again, local problem solvers on the ground and empower our local communities to help integrate all forms of economic activity into their area.
So when you were here last year, you told us how important local control was to you, and another panelist yesterday talked about how you look at local control as being very important in many things besides oil and gas. Did this provide the local control that you were looking for?
So yeah, and I didn't get to watch all your panels yesterday, but by no means is this exclusive to oil and gas. There's local control around tobacco, around electric scooters, around marijuana delivery, just this session. So I believe personally that the level of government that is closest to the people usually makes the best decisions. That doesn't mean we don't have national laws or state laws. Of course we do. But that's a lot of interjurisdictional efforts. In general, it is the problem solvers on the ground close to the community that should be empowered to really have a say, an important say in how their community develops, and whether it's scooters or what offices or homes or density. Those decisions are made at the local level. So I do think this new regime did a good job in really empowering our commissioners and our city council people to be able to have more of a say over efforts that have positive and negative impacts in their community.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that, having a little more of a say over it. Even before you signed 181, we began to see local governments issuing moratoria on oil and gas development. We have 9 communities now that have issued moratoria. A few of those, Boulder, Broomfield, Adams County, are trying to figure out how they're going to wield this new authority that they have. And we very much are concerned about what that might look like. I'm afraid in some of those areas it may not allow for oil and gas development. Is that the type of local control that you were looking for under 181?
So these moratoriums are, as you indicated, nothing new. There had been many well before 181. I think that there are some now as people are looking at the new law. Again, nor are they unique to oil and gas. I mean, Summit County has a moratorium on electric bikes. Boulder, the city, has a moratorium on banks. So new banks. So I mean, they're a tool that's used while they're creating the framework at the local level. With regard to bans, and again, there's communities that tried to do bans before 181, and perhaps after. I don't know if any have tried to do it after, but there's nothing in 181 that changes the legal status of bans.
Okay. On the same topic of local control, I'd like to talk a little bit about Weld County. Weld County has opened a new oil and gas department and wants oil and gas development in their county. They also seem to have a handle on how to do that. They're looking for more local control. Do you support that local control? Would you be willing to delegate oil and gas well location to Weld County?
Well, again, at first, when I obviously one key thing about the local control in 181 is it is optional for any jurisdiction. We fully expected that there would be many jurisdictions, based on my preliminary conversations with the Weld County commissioners during 181, I thought they would be one of them, that would not use the local authority under 181 because they didn't want to put any additional impediments in the way of oil and gas in their community. Again, it's entirely their business, but I was a little bit concerned for the industry when I thought Weld County might be putting more impediments or bureaucracy or red tape and yet more difficulties in the approval process in our most important oil and gas county. But I think that we are hopefully working through that with them. It's my understanding we're very close to an MOU with them that'll help resolve some of their desires not to stand in the way of the industry in their county.
So I don't believe they were putting it up impediments from my viewpoint.
Well, it would have required
Oil and gas.
two totally different. I mean, they were taxing oil and gas companies in their jurisdiction to create bureaucrats in their county. So I mean, again, I'm not passing judgment on it. That's their prerogative, but that's what they were doing.
Right. I think that was the sort of asserting the local control that they believe that they have under.
Oh, which they're welcome to. As I said, I welcome the Weld County's newfound support for local control. We did not. I didn't expect them to use the local control because I thought they would want things to continue as they were. But I think perhaps they might want to make a political show of it and say that they're doing something. I don't think they actually want to impede the industry in Weld County. I don't think they do. And so I don't think anything that they're doing is in that direction. But I think they wanted to make some sort of show of it. But if we can work it out through an MOU, which I think we can, our directive at COGCC is to partner with local governments across the board. So we have probably local governments that will follow Weld's lead if there's some kind of agreement that we can work on with. And there's other local governments that just don't want to be involved. And they weren't involved before, they aren't involved now, and they can rubber stamp the zoning piece if that's what they choose to do.
Right. So part of that, obviously, we'll talk about permits here in a second. The implementation of 181, as you know, will take some time. There's more than a dozen rulemakings. We've got these 9 communities doing their own rulemakings. What are your expectations for how the oil and natural gas industry will look after 2+ years of rulemakings?
Well, I don't think it's the right question. I think that if you're asking how the oil and gas industry will look in 2 years, it's probably the answer to that is something that I'm among the least qualified in the room to answer, and that's what's the price of oil and natural gas going to be in 2 years. We have over 5,400 wells that have already been permitted and approved. When you look at that any time horizon, I mean, I think the activity is pretty much locked in for a period of months or even a year. But if you're asking what's going to be occurring in 2 years, you're best off talking to economists and others about what some of the trends are in commodities pricing.
Well, I mean, but the policies that you've set into motion,
I expect, again, I would expect Weld County will continue to elect commissioners that are favorable for the zoning desires of the industry. I expect that other counties will have a nuanced approach. Again, you're asking for more of a political prediction. I think the political culture of counties and the economic development strategy of counties is really different in each county, and that's something that we should not just accept, but frankly celebrate. I mean, it's wonderful that Boulder and Weld County aren't the same. It's the diversity of our state that really makes us great, and that means the ethnic diversity of our state. It means that in our great state. I was just in Southwest Colorado. I met with the Southern Utes and the Ute Mountain Ute last week. We celebrate people in our state who have had families here for thousands of years. We have descendants of the Spanish settlers from 500 years ago in the San Luis Valley. We have first-generation Coloradans like me. I was born here. My parents came here in 1970. I was born a few years later. And we have new arrivals from New York, from California, and from China and from Mexico. And we really celebrate all of that. And that great diversity of our state, and that includes the political diversity and the approach to economic development in different counties and different cities, is really part of what makes our state amazing.
Yeah, great. You had mentioned Weld County and other communities that want to continue having oil and gas in their communities or counties. To do that, you need to get permits from the state and the way that the system is set up today. And I believe that some of the changes that have been made at the COGCC are beginning to see a few more of those permits come out. But we have a lot of folks who are very concerned about if they're going to see those permits. And part of that, as you know, as a business person, is that certainty. When you're setting up a whole system, these are complex, highly technical operations that our members run, and they want to know what that certainty looks like, and so they can begin planning. And so when you get a Form 2A, that location assessment, you can begin building the pad, and you're hiring construction workers. And I think a lot of people don't often see the the whole impact that our industry has. It's not just the oil and gas industry, it's the construction fields and everybody else that comes along. So the concern is if you don't start seeing more of those permits, and if you have to lay down a rig, and then you lay down a rig, you're laying off people, and that becomes, certainly not an economy I think that you want to preside over as governor. So talk a little bit about that and kind of how you see the permits process.
Well, first we should be glad that we're not in Wyoming where there's a 40,000 permit backlog. The biggest reason for the backlog here is the rush of applications before 112. So there were 2.5 times the number of applications, mostly mid last year. Obviously, this is something that we inherited. I think there's two ways that this is being addressed. One is additional people, additional FTEs. 181 established, I think, 25 new positions that are funded at COGCC. They started July 1st. That doesn't mean they're all filled yet. If any of you are looking to work, get out of this, do a stint in the public sector, they're hiring. But they had budget for 25 new people. The other is coming next year, and that's the professionalization of the COGCC, which, I think this is a lot to ask of volunteers. I think there's vast opportunities for a professional commission to really put health and safety first, address the backlog, undertake the regulation of the oil and gas industry in a manner consistent with 181. Having the full-time paid commissioners will really increase the bandwidth of the commission. Part of that is, they just met in Rifle. Of course, we're trying to get them all over the state. Dan Gibbs, the chair of the COGCC and the head of the Division of Natural Resources, was just telling me they're planning a number of other meetings across the state. But again, it's a lot to ask of volunteers, especially if you've seen what they go through at their meetings. So I think this professionalization is a good step that will take place next year.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you on that. I think that we're looking forward to seeing that professional commission come on and having people who are there every day, making this their job to look at how we go about business and protecting the health, safety, and welfare of Coloradans, which I believe our industry does every day. So talking about this and sort of the climate that we're in today and this idea of certainty or uncertainty, the political rhetoric that's around there about ending fossil fuels, and we don't need fossil fuels, and presidential candidates like Bernie Sanders saying we should jail executives of fossil fuel companies. All of that builds into an area where a lot of our employees, folks who are not here today, begin to feel nervous for their jobs in Colorado. What can you say to those people?
Well, I happen to be a Democrat, so I worry much more about Trump's tariffs and their impact on the infrastructure for the oil and gas industry and other industries, the closing down of overseas markets, the damage to the workforce readiness that he's done with cracking down on immigration. So, you can choose which side you focus on the economic threats from, but obviously I'm much more worried about who's president today than who might be president in a couple of years. But, in general, again, I think that we are focused, as you know, on transforming the grid to 100% renewable energy by 2040. It's really a question of when we can recognize savings from lower cost forms of energy, wind and solar, retire high cost existing coal. I think the question is how long do we want to either subsidize legacy assets that are higher cost or force consumers to pay more for electricity. And I'm in the camp that we should end subsidies and save consumers money sooner rather than later. Of course, we're also looking at other sources of pollutants. We've done a lot of work around making more electric vehicles available in Colorado sooner rather than later. We're at about 2.5% electric vehicles. And I would point out this is more than just a climate issue. That's enough, but it is also an air quality issue. We've had more than 15 days of unhealthy air quality here in the Denver metro area, 40 last year, particularly bad for seniors, for kids, for athletes, increased asthma rates, increased healthcare costs. So tying into our agenda to save people money on healthcare, we're looking at, of course, reducing the amount of pollution from the vehicle fleet. And then also, as you know, in Senate Bill 181, efforts around working with the Air Quality Control Commission and the oil and gas industry around best practices in reducing harmful emissions, both from the health side and, of course, from the climate side.
Kind of go back to that question about what can you say to the person in Colorado who might be worried about their job as we have this period of uncertainty in the regulatory and political world?
Well, again, I think that there's no question there's less uncertainty than there was in prior years. I think the threats of not just 112, but similar efforts before were really an existential issue. And again, I think by appreciating that we are a diverse state and that we empower local elected officials to solve problems, it doesn't mean that every issue around oil and gas will be solved. What it means is, instead of people venting their frustrations through risky statewide initiatives like 74 or 112, both of which would have damaged the economy in my view, people will have those appropriate discussions on the local level about the best economic mix for different areas.
Okay. You talked about your plan to go 100% renewable, and I had a question about that. We've had some panels here today talking about the amazing technology that's taking place in natural gas and capturing carbon and ways that we can do this cleaner, better than ever before. Why not a 100% carbon neutral plan by 2050 rather than a 100% renewable plan where you're choosing the technology?
Well, it's interesting because from the electricity side, we are excited about what you are frustrated about, which is record low natural gas prices. So that is good news for natural gas to be part of the grid. It's bad news for producers. So it depends, I guess, on whether you have the consumer perspective or the producer perspective. So again, a lot of this depends on commodities prices. But if there are low prices for natural gas, if this is the new normal, it'll likely remain part of the mix longer than if it returns to historical levels.
Before we move on to something else, just last thing on 181. The lawmakers who passed it called it the most sweeping legislation in 60 years. Do you see the need to do further oil and gas legislation in the coming years of your term?
Well, again, I think that this fundamentally addressed the state piece. Obviously, the COGCC still has the work to fully implement it. What it fundamentally means is that discussion will be at the local level. It'll be in Weld County, it'll be in Adams County, it'll be in the Piceance Basin in western Colorado. And so I don't think that effort will be centralized through the lawmaking process in that way in Denver, because I think we've empowered our city councils and our commissioners to really play a partnership role in solving that. Obviously, again, of course, there's a statewide role, health and safety. No jurisdiction can allow something that's endangering their citizens. That's not unique to oil and gas. That's across the board. I mean, we have building codes. No city can cite a 30-story building that's going to collapse. I mean, that's normal stuff. But whether they build whether they have a 4-story height limit or a 20-story height limit, and whether it's part commercial, part residential, that stuff local zoning folks do.
So I'll mark you down for no major oil and gas legislation next year?
I'm not expecting any. I think, as I said, there's I'm sure there's 100 legislators, and there's Republicans and Democrats with all sorts of ideas. So I mean, if none of them have talked to us about any major ideas, so I don't know. But I would be shocked if some members on both sides of the aisle didn't run some bill relating to a major Colorado industry.
Okay, thanks. Let's shift to climate change. You kind of talked about it a little bit in the legislation that passed this year, landmark legislation that directs the state of Colorado for decades to come. The core objective is to reach 90% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2050. Some are arguing that that's not even possible. Some are arguing that we need to do that by 2030. We can't wait to 2050. And we have even others saying that we have just 18 months left for action. And I think we seem to be in this world of sort of extreme political one-upsmanship when it comes to climate change, particularly with the presidential campaigns. Do you believe that we have 18 months left for climate action?
Well, again, we want to do whatever we can. These are goals, not mandates under these laws. So, and it's for that very reason that we just need the flexibility to do what's possible, not do what's impossible. And again, priority is saving people money on electricity by retiring costly legacy coal assets, moving towards more electric vehicles, has the added benefit of cleaner air from a health perspective, working with the oil and gas industry and reducing emissions. And then, of course, on buildings and sustainable practices in ag and a number of other areas. So, I mean, we're working in all those areas. Again, you'd be better suited to have a kind of futurist or economist tell you whether that year is going to be 2035, 2045, or 2055. Our goal, again, 2040 for the grid. And that's, as you indicated, 90% 2050 economy-wide. A big piece of that is what's going to happen with cars and automobiles. we don't have the horizon to know if that's going to happen or not. That's why it's a goal. We're going to get to 6%, I think, within 5 years, but that's still 94% that are, internal combustion engines. And what happens in 2040 or 2050 with that is really hard to say with transportation technology.
And you, I think, rightly said that the laws that were passed were benchmarks or goals, but through the rulemaking process, you'll agree that there's likely to be mandates in that.
Well, they're goals, and I mean, there's no, they're not top-down mandates that need to be met. It all just depends on the reality. We want to be aggressive with meeting the climate challenges that the world faces. We want Colorado to be a leader in climate change rather than a follower. We want to make sure that the new and growing green economy works for our state rather than is something that happens to our state. It's something that provides enormous economic opportunities in many different areas, and we hope that Colorado is positioned for a leadership role in that.
Great. And I think if you talk with folks in our industry, we believe that we are part of that solution as well. We have seen emissions drop along the Front Range. We've seen CO2 emissions go down here in Colorado and across the globe as we use more clean burning natural gas and take coal off of the line. It's frustrating for us at times because I feel like people aren't maybe hearing that message or understanding the efforts that our folks are going through to really use that technology and that innovation to clean the air and do the right thing by Coloradans, by neighbors, by by the environment. And so my question to you is, what role do you see for us for natural gas in this climate?
Well, so first of all, there's obviously some companies that are quite literally a part of this, like BP, that we're thrilled to have their headquarters here in Denver, that literally is also in renewable energy business. But for those of you that aren't, what we look at is how we do relative to our global peers in the emission profile of extraction. Given that there's a market for commodities, they will be produced, whether it's here, whether it's Mexico, or whether it's Saudi Arabia. And we want to make sure that we have a more environmentally efficient way, as we do, of doing it here. Additional work around air quality, around infrastructure and pipeline, around reducing and hopefully eliminating flaring. These are all things that I know are industry initiatives that we hope to partner on achieving.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about financial markets. And I know you had mentioned commodity prices, and certainly I think natural gas, where we heard that in our conference over the past 2 days, is sort of lower for longer, and that certainly impacts our industry and our businesses.
It's great for consumers.
It's great for consumers, and frankly, from a trade association standpoint, there's a nice sweet spot there as well, where we can talk about the benefit that it has for consumers, but that certainly impacts financial markets. And so commodity prices, I think, impact all of us across the country, but what I see often from financial analysts is this sort of legislative tensions, political tensions in Colorado impacting markets here. So it's not just the sort of global commodity crisis, it's the political risk that people look at in Colorado. How do we send the message that Colorado is open for business?
Well, I think clearly we have decreased political risk to what we had in 2014, 2015, 2016. I am not an expert that knows the political risk profile in other jurisdictions, but certainly there is significantly decreased risk in our state of rigid, industry ending setback requirements of these kinds of measures that would negatively affect the regulatory structure of the industry. There's always the risk of who people elect in any place, right? I mean, will Weld County elect, 5 anti-oil and gas commissioners? I don't think so, but there's always the possibility of who people elect in different areas. But that risk is considerably less than it was. And so I think hopefully the efforts with 181, the efforts with enshrining the rules and regs and providing this kind of continuity and predictability will allow operators to have a longer time horizon for their planning work in Colorado. Again, you can't compare us to the ideal. You have to compare us to actual other jurisdictions, and we're happy to kind of market our value proposition.
Colorado's open for business.
Well, yeah. Well, we're always open for business, right? I mean, we're excited.
For our business.
For your business, look, as long as commodity prices are good, you're going to have a good business. it has nothing to do with me and nothing to do with our state politics, and less even to do with national politics. It really has to do with supply and demand. And it has something to do with international politics, frankly, too, with OPEC politics and with Venezuelan politics. So, I mean, I'd be following the ins and outs of Venezuelan politics more than I'd be following the ins and outs of Colorado politics if I was a banking analyst.
Well, and we do all of those things. And with all due respect, it does, what you do and what you say does matter. And what happens in Colorado does matter. I'm telling you, I read those financial analysts, and they talk about that. They talk about the political tensions and the...
Yeah, we don't have the power to move markets. I mean, even if somehow, this isn't going to happen here, but if somehow every vehicle was electric tomorrow and we stop consuming gas, and if we stop consuming natural gas on the grid, the effect on commodities pricing would be de minimis. We're just not big enough to really drive that.
Okay. If you have questions for the governor, I'm sure there's many things I haven't asked yet. Feel free to write those down and somebody will collect them. Question for you about ballot initiatives. You had brought it up, 74 and 112. Given 181, the rulemaking process that we're going through now and the changes that are taking place, if another one of those ballot measures comes up in 2020 that aims to put a lot of us out of work, where will you stand?
Well, of course I was opposed to 112. I would oppose that kind of initiative again. But a lot of the work that we've done is to reduce the risk of that kind of effort. Because again, if people are happy and they have confidence in their city council, confidence in their commissioners, and they do, by the way, rightfully so, people have most trust in local government. They don't want an unelected board in Denver making decisions for them in Routt County, in Weld County, in Adams County, in Boulder County. So by changing that dynamic, you significantly decrease, support for that kind of one-size-fits-all effort.
And that's part of what's been happening now.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're going to have some packed, county commissioning and county planning board meetings, but you see less people that are trying to force a one-size-fits-all solution on everybody.
Right. We look at energy and we talk about energy being a nonpartisan issue because we all need it. We need efficient, affordable energy, and for the foreseeable future, it's going to be very important to all of us that we have this in Colorado. So how do we build trust with you and your administration and the government and our industry?
Well, I mean, look, we want to have a Colorado that works for everybody, and that means a Colorado that works for people in tech and in healthcare, that works for an oil and gas worker that puts food on their table and buys a home with the earnings they make. We want to reflect the diversity of the state and really try to transition to people realizing that diversity is not something to be ashamed of or just to tolerate. It's really just something to celebrate. We're a great state because we have such great political and cultural and gender and ethnic diversity and religious diversity, and we wouldn't be nearly as vibrant a state economically, socially, or culturally if we were just monolithic in every way.
Right. So, can you still drill for oil in a blue state?
Well, it's a silly question. When I saw it, I was just like, that means it's like saying, can you build a solar farm in a red state? It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, energy is not inherently political, it's inherently economic. So, I mean, it's a geological question, it's not a political question. And I know very little about geology, unlike our last governor. So, I mean, you tell me, is the Piceance and the DJ Basin, how are our basins performing economically? It's all about the dollar, it's all about economics. And, just as wind and solar are in Texas or another state, right. The political layer is not determinative. It's always the economic layer that is far above whatever the agenda of any particular political party is.
Well, I can tell you the geology is fantastic here.
You're not a geologist, are you, Dan? Come on.
All of them tell me that.
That's good.
I believe my members.
What if they're telling it? What if they're just saying it to make you feel good?
I try to make them feel good versus them making me feel good. The geology is good. We've got a dedicated workforce here, and certainly we do watch those global commodity prices, whatnot. But I think you underestimate the impact that political rhetoric, political actions, and regulatory actions have on what we're doing here in
I don't think it's so
Colorado?
much that I underestimate it. I think it's that financial markets overestimate the impact of political rhetoric. The commodities pricing and the market is what drives things. It is a much larger force than partisan politics, than Democrats or Republicans, than you name it. Does the elected and political piece have a subtle, influence on that over time? I mean, if people are in other states are moving towards electric vehicles and more wind power in 20 years, is there less demand for natural gas and gasoline? Yeah, then it might move the dial on commodities pricing, but our Colorado demand doesn't. I think that a lot of those assumptions about demand domestically and globally are built into the economic models that your industry economists are looking at for the medium and long term.
Okay. A few questions here from the audience. Severance taxes. Thank you. Severance taxes generate hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for K-12 education. In a state governed by Tabor, how do you reconcile policies that reduce oil and gas activities with funding your education priorities?
Well, I think I got so far our July collections of severance tax are up over last year, 9.8 million compared to 9.7 million. We have Rick Garcia here. Where's Rick from our Department of Local Affairs? Rick is the Santa Claus of state government. I don't know where your beard is, but a lot of those severance taxes work their way to efforts with counties, with local governments around meeting critical infrastructure needs, including around our priority areas of renewable energy and early childhood education, but in so many other areas across the state. I'm not sure what that questioner was saying, but it doesn't directly affect the kind of operating side of the state budget directly.
If fossil fuels through new technology had zero carbon footprint, would you support them?
Why support any efficiency in technology? I mean, it's a silly question because does the economics support it?
All of our
No.
questions be silly?
It's like, does the economics support it? Is it a cheaper way to extract gas and oil? Then if it is, it'll be used, and if it's not, then it won't. So I mean, it's not. I mean, of course, I'd go to a ribbon cutting for it, of course. But I mean, that doesn't really impact whether it's used or not.
I think we'd love to have you to the ribbon cutting.
We'll have you.
I think probably what I'm looking at a lot of these questions. I think what a lot of people want to hear is that, and maybe this sounds silly, or is that what you keep saying about the question? Silly? And maybe this sounds silly too.
Just some of those about like that. I mean,
people want to feel like they're valued. Their jobs are valued and they're wanted in this state. And for a long time, and especially this year, a lot of us have felt like we're not.
Well, you say your jobs are valued and you're an important part of the diversity of our state.
Well, see, there you go. Now you get an applause then.
And that's not silly. That's important because that's really about families and it's about people making their mortgages. It's about jobs.
Absolutely.
It's about our local economies. That is a very serious question, and I think it's very important to make sure that Colorado for All really celebrates the contributions of all Coloradans.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate that. Go ahead and applaud him again because I think that's important to say because we believe in that Colorado for All, and that is all of us. That's our jobs should be included in that mix as well. Let me just get you another question here. I know we're getting close on time. Do you support tax revenue earned from oil and gas being removed from counties banning oil and gas development?
I have not heard any proposals around that. So again, we currently as I said, our director of local affairs is here, and they partner with counties. I think a lot of the work and Rick will know more about where it goes than us, but I believe a disproportionate amount goes to lower income and less populated counties. Rick, is that right in general? Rural areas. We see it as a key part of rural economic development. I mean, it's not that the suburban counties get zero. They do get something, but if you look at really our rural economic development initiative, that's a focus. And yes, that includes counties that are not production counties. There are counties that don't produce, but some of the severance tax flows to. And frankly, you could argue that some of those counties might need it as much or more. They don't have that same local tax base as a a wealthier county that might have their own local revenue.
Okay. Let me ask you one yes or no question, and then one more follow-up. Can Senate Bill 181 as written be used as a pretext for shutting down development? Yes or no?
Well, again, there's nothing about banning development in Senate Bill 181. It doesn't mean that people haven't, under the old law or the new law, made various arguments in court. But there is nothing from our perspectives that would specifically allow these kinds of bans.
If oil and gas development is not just a matter of commodity price, but also cost of development and operations, is it possible for local control via Senate Bill 181 to make development too costly in some places in Colorado?
Well, look, I mean, cost drivers are minor compared to price. I mean, just think about this in your business, right? I mean, you know, does it, you know, I'm not going to be here and say this has no impact. I mean, of course, your cost of goods sold in any business is a factor, but there's just such a difference of whether you're getting $40 a barrel or $60 a barrel or $80 a barrel. I mean, the input and the cost of whether you need this recapture device or you need this pipeline, I mean, those are kind of in the wash. I mean, I don't doubt, again, if there's, you know, if you're talking about like a, you know, $1 difference in the oil price, maybe that helps make your determination looking at those cost inputs. But it's a far bigger impact is the commodities market. And again, we certainly want to be in the forefront of technology around as clean an extraction process as possible.
Okay. I'm going to give you the final word in just a second, but I'm going to, remember I used to get paid to ask you questions, and I just love asking
You still
questions.
are.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have one more, and then I'll give you the last
what's old
word.
is new.
Germany and Denmark have made the biggest commitment to renewable energy and have by far the most expensive electricity in the developed world. Why is it going to work better in Colorado?
Well, I'm not an authority on the path that Germany and Denmark have taken or when they took it. When we look at electricity here, when Xcel put out for bid new wind power 6 months ago, it came in with storage at about 30% less than existing coal. So again, it's really a question of when will we stop subsidizing costly fossil fuels, move to more solar and wind. Wind, obviously, large-scale workhorse.
We're subsidizing those too, right?
There are federal subsidies for those, and you don't want to get into, there's federal subsidies for oil and gas too.
Sure.
I mean, you can certainly say we should put them on a level playing field.
We'll take that deal.
Well, you have to put oil and gas subsidies on the table there too. I mean, that's all. I used to say this in Washington, and when I was a congressman, I always used to say, you're happy to talk about not having these renewable subsidies, but you have to get rid of the oil and gas subsidies. So that's not going to happen. They're going to keep subsidizing them both, as far as I can tell. But anyway, so retiring those costly legacy assets and saving consumers money is going to be what's important.
Great. I'm going to give you the final word. What would you like to tell oil and gas employees in Colorado?
Well, look, this is we want to make sure that this is a exciting time in Colorado. I think with additional stability, hopefully that'll send a positive message to capital markets. We want to make sure that we put health and safety first, that we empower our local communities, our problem solvers on the ground to make the decisions that directly affect the quality of life of their constituents. And we look forward to partnering with you and every industry to make sure that that we can all thrive in this great state, and look forward to continuing this discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks. Oh, we almost made it. We almost made it. Yeah. Almost made it this year.
I hope some of
Last year was 3, so if we had just the 1.
I hope some of you, I hope some of you volunteered on my campaign as well. But obviously, I was very clear during the campaign where I was on these. You know, I was against 112, and we talked about local control, and really, it's frustrating. Let me just say, there are those in the industry that I'm very frustrated with, and probably not anybody in this room. But I mean, you see people saying that I was somehow I was putting 112 in when the voters rejected it. I mean, I want you to say, Dan, hopefully 181 is a totally different thing than 112.
Well, I think certainly 112 would have decimated our industry beginning this year. I think 181, the jury is out as to what that's going to do. I think 2 years of rulemakings are going to be really rough. The devil's in the details of all those rules when they come down there. We've got local communities who have banned oil and gas, creating more uncertainty there.
Well,
Our industry has seen some
Yeah.
tough times.
No, I mean, they did that before 181 too. I mean, these moratoriums and bans are not something that 181 had much effect on one way or the other. I
They're
mean,
doing it because of 181.
Oh,
They're
they
saying
did it
we
because
have-
of the lack of 181 before. So, I mean,
Sure.
that's just what they're doing. There were how many that tried to do bans and moratoriums before 181? I mean,
Yeah.
dozens, I think.
Right. And that's why it's up to us as an industry to make sure we are out working with those communities and doing the best we can to meet those communities' unique needs and develop our resources in the way that I know that we are, as healthy and safe and responsible as possible. And this is a passionate issue, as you saw from the woman who was here to tell you that she didn't want any more oil and gas. And our folks here, want to continue to work in Colorado. And obviously this issue for many years has sort of inflamed those passions. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we're having these conversations and settling down the rhetoric wherever we can. And that's one of the reasons we want to be able to have you here to have this conversation with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just that my parting thoughts are, just focus on the economics and focus on your business and your revenues and your costs. And, and I think that there's not a lot of worry that I would have in your shoes about a regulatory uncertainty or regulatory overhang in our state. I'd be much more focused on Venezuela and OPEC and Russia than politics of Colorado.
Well, focused on all those things. So please join me in thanking Governor Polis for joining us today for lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.